Welcome. I'm Eric Malinowski, co-president of SOMA Action, and also joining me will be our executive committee member Stan Varon to help with questions. SOMA Action is a grassroots organization dedicated to driving progressive change, and as part of that, we put out a voter guide for every election, interviewing and evaluating candidates about their support for the issues our committees are working on. Please note that the questions are restricted to areas where our committees are active, so there are some important issues we don't cover, and we hope that voters will seek out candidates and learn more. Today, we are joined by John Bartlett, a candidate for New Jersey's 11th Congressional District. John, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Could you please introduce yourself and tell us why you're running for Congress?
Thank you very much. Absolutely. Um, I'm a county commissioner in Passaic County, New Jersey. My name is John Bartlett, and I was very briefly in the primary contest with Mikey Sherrill 8 years ago. She's been an excellent representative for the 11th district, and she's going to be a great, great governor. And now it falls to the voters of the 11th district to select her successor at a time when it feels like Washington, D.C. and our whole national political scene is on fire, where all the norms and all the bipartisan relationships that used to protect our democracy, all those guardrails, as we sometimes call them, are crumbling under the weight and the ambition of the second Trump administration. Donald Trump is all about self-service. He is enriching himself and his cronies while the rest of us struggle to get by. I'm about public service and always have been. And I'm ready for the fight ahead. And that's an important part of what I want to convey is that we need someone that's ready to step up on day one and take the fight to Trump and MAGA Republicans. Anyone can say they're a fighter, and I'm sure you're going to have to interview a lot of people for this seat that are going to say that they're a fighter, but look at their record of results. I'm the candidate in this contest who's taken on Donald Trump in the US Supreme Court and won when he tried to weaponize the 2020 census against immigrant communities, who stood up to Governor Chris Christie and won when he tried to delay infrastructure funding for safety improvements to Route 46 and 3 near Montclair State University and for senior services that my constituents needed. And as a voting rights lawyer, I've gone toe-to-toe with the GOP in federal court to fight racially targeted voter suppression and protect everyone's right to vote. And I won again. We only have one chance, and I'm saying this as a voting rights lawyer, we have one chance to make sure that the presidential election of 2028 is free and fair. And sending a voting rights lawyer to Congress now is essential to protect American democracy for the next generation. Now, the other crucial issue that families and residents in our area is facing is affordability. And I have focused on affordability for more than a decade as a Passaic County Commissioner, representing the 525,000 constituents and more broadly, all the residents of the 11th Congressional District. I brought in more than $960 million in new federal infrastructure funding for projects large and small across the 11th District. That's funding that by accessing it from the federal government, we're able to accomplish things for the district that you couldn't out of your local or your municipal or your county budget. And that's enabled us to make your commutes faster and your communities safer. I've lowered my county property tax rate every year for the last 9 years, while still investing in new parks and public schools, supporting small business as a driver of economic growth, achieving the county's highest credit rating in history, and protecting our public health system from RFK Jr.'s cuts, just to name a few. I'm eager to tell you more about all of that as we go through the questions, but I want to give you the opportunity to launch into the questions that you have for me.
Thank you. I'll pass it over to Stan to start off with our intro questions.
Yeah. So you're running to be one of 435 voting members of one House of Congress. That's power, but it's limited. So realistically, what will you have the power to do as a U.S. representative, and what won't you have the power to do?
That's a great question. And you're absolutely right. It's one of 435, one of 535 across the two houses of Congress. Um, I think there are a couple important things that the elected member from this district will be able to do right away upon arrival in April after the general election. And I think there's even more that this representative is going to be able to do after November when Democrats retake a majority in the House of Representatives. First and foremost, as I said, I come in at this as a voting rights lawyer and seeing the clock ticking down towards election 2028, seeing the kind of shenanigans that I've fought against from the GOP for 24 years already. coming along, and we need to be ready for that. And the voice of someone who can talk about that, shine a spotlight on that, is going to be very, very important to the dialogue going ahead. Another important role for the member of Congress from this district, whether you're in the majority or the minority or whatever, is bringing in resources to the district. And that's an area where I have experience. I talked about transportation. I sit on the NJTPA, the North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority. That's the body through which all federal funding flows into infrastructure in North Jersey. Everything from the Gateway Project, which I've been a strong advocate of, to Rails to Trails in Morris County, to a whole host of other things. I've been on that board for a dozen years. I understand how the funding process works. I understand how to go access those funds. And I've also worked hard with localities and counties to make sure we're getting every opportunity to access those funds. Very often, these are competitive federal grant programs. There's an application, there's red tape, there's reporting. One of the things I've made sure NJTPA invests in is what's called local aid, helping towns like South Orange Maplewood that want to apply for federal funding get through all that federal paperwork so that towns like yours can still access those resources. As a member of Congress, I would support that both as an advocate, but also specifically by having someone in my office tasked to assist localities, to assist towns and cities in accessing federal funds, whether you're talking about transportation or education or housing or any issue.
Okay, you may have answered B already. What skills does a congressperson need to be effective, and how have you demonstrated those skills? I think you sort of told us that.
No,
So I'm going to go to
but I like the fact that you asked that question, because at the end of the day, we're often called on to comment on the topic of the moment, the thing that everyone is speaking about. But I think when you're talking about choosing the Democratic candidate for this seat in this district this year, obviously I have some very immediate concerns, like voting rights and protecting free and fair elections in the US. But what everyone needs to also keep in mind is that you're selecting someone who should be a person of principle, a person whose record of results shows that they're a person that is in it for the right reasons, that is in it for public service and not self-service. So we're choosing somebody to deal with today's issues and emergencies, whether it's healthcare affordability or what have you, but we're also choosing someone who we know will be the principled voice that we want speaking on our behalf in Washington.
Okay. Often in politics, donors, political bosses, other people with power will try to persuade you to prioritize their interests over those of your constituents. This could be by making you dependent on their money, having control over your career, or simply building relationships that make it hard to say no to your friends. What have you done or will you do to keep yourself free of these entanglements and protect against them unduly impacting your judgment?
I think that's an excellent question, and I'm very glad you asked it. There is, as I said during the Essex County Convention just the other day, this is not a reward for who somebody has hired or lobbied for or supported. This is not a reward for being from a particular county or from a particular town. This is our opportunity to select the voice of this district in Washington, not just for this year and next year, but potentially for many years to come. What I can tell you is talk to my constituent in Passaic County. Everyone knows how accessible I am. Everyone knows that when folks reach out to me, it's not about the power that they have or who brings them in the door or what interest they represent. It's about the need that they're bringing to me. And I'm trying to think of a good example of that. And I think one of them might be the work that I've done over many years in Passaic County, helping families affected by autism spectrum disorders. So I'm the son of a country doctor. My dad was a pediatrician who drove a pickup truck and kept a chainsaw next to his old black doctor's bag, so nothing would stand between him and a patient. I rode with him in that pickup truck on house calls growing up, and I learned so much from him as a pediatrician about helping every family and every kid thrive. And when I became a county commissioner in Passaic County, freeholder back then, one of the things that I very quickly learned is that There are a lot of families in the district, in the county, affected by autism who didn't have access to services or didn't know what services were available. So, for example, we opened up the pool at our Passaic County Technical High School on Saturdays for swim lessons for kids with autism because drowning is a major cause of death for young people on the spectrum. We opened up that pool to the Special Olympics swim team. It wasn't a matter of building a pool, it was a matter of unlocking a door on a Saturday. I've continued to do projects with our sheriff's office on wandering. A project every couple of years, I host a public info session with our county surrogate, talking specifically about uh, special needs trusts and estate planning for families where those issues are of concern. It's about making sure people have access to that information. And when folks came to me with that need, I was able to identify some very specific ways to help them out. And it led in some great directions. Because I became someone that the disability community knew was a resource person and an advocate for them. When there was a state grant available to make hearing loop technology available in our county buildings, where you've got those modern hearing aids that have the Bluetooth capacity, we actually I was approached by someone in that community, and we wrote a state grant. And we now have access. If you come and sit in our meeting room, if you come to our sheriff's office to talk to somebody, and you've got that hearing loop technology for people with hearing loss, that is available. So, being that sort of responsive individual to anyone that comes in the door is something that I've always prided myself on, and that's the way I would continue to be in Congress.
Okay. No one is per no one is perfect, but we're looking for leaders who create a culture that holds themselves and those around them to high standards of responsible and ethical public service for any leadership position you've held. For any leadership position you've held, could you think back to times when you realized, oh, there's a risk here that me or my staff might be tempted to abuse power or behave unethically? What measures did you put in place to prevent that from happening? Or if someone did slip up, what did you do to correct it as quickly as possible and make sure it never happened again?
So, in addition to being an elected official and being bound by the code of conduct and ethics for elected officials, I'm also an attorney. So, from the very beginning of my public career, I've been well aware that it's not just my professional standing as an elected official that's on the line. It's my professional capacity to continue practicing the law. And one of the hurdles to become a lawyer is not just the bar exam, which everybody's heard of, but also passing the Committee on Character of the Bar Association, where they are looking for ethics and character. So I have always had that in mind as part of my thinking about my role. And what I'll tell you is that I accomplish what you're talking about by being someone who focuses on the needs that are brought to me and not the interests that are bringing them. I've given some examples already in terms of families with special needs vis-a-vis education, people with hearing disabilities. Anything that comes to me, I evaluate on the merits, and I try and find ways either that the county government can do what we can, or I point those folks in the right direction. Very often, people know that they need help and but don't really know where to get it. Very often, I'm sort of a traffic cop. I'm saying, oh, that's the Board of Social Services that does that, or that's your local Board of Education that does that, or here's a state program that can help you out. Same kind of thing would be my approach in federal government of making sure I'm in contact with all those different levels of government, know where the resources are, and by focusing on the needs of the people in front of me, I say, and not not where they came from or who brought them in the door, and abiding by my ethical codes as both an elected official and a member of the bar. That's exactly the sort of conduct I would continue to exhibit.
Thank you. Erica?
Okay, our next set is a set of big picture questions, and then I'll pass it back over to Stan to ask some issue-specific ones. So our assumption is that we are in a time of attempted authoritarian takeover. Instead of politics as usual, we need to draw on the much deeper set of strategies that nonviolent civil resistance movements around the globe have used to reclaim their government when a ruler tries to insist that they get to do whatever they want with all the power and all the money. First, do you agree with this assessment? And if so, what do you think needs to happen to get us to a place where we have a healthy and functional democratic government?
I absolutely agree that that's the risk this country faces right now. And it's really extraordinary to be here on the cusp of turning 250 years old as a nation and feeling that our most basic structures and rights are threatened. And what's happened is we've now twice elected a president who is out to test every boundary there is and is not accustomed to being told no. And that is, we're now discovering, profoundly dangerous because we're discovering the number of things that felt like rules and laws and turned out to be norms. And just the notion of statesmanship and human dignity and shame, none of which seem to be in any way a motivating factor for people in the Trump administration right now. I think one of the things we absolutely need to do is all those things that felt like firm boundaries that now we've discovered are not, those do need to be codified into law because uh, there is an obvious temptation to an imperial presidency like the one that the Trump administration is trying to put into place. And the means to avoid that is for each branch of government to assert its prerogative, not just when you're of the other party, but because the function of Congress and not the president is to set tariffs or levy war or what have you. And by surrendering those, or by not using the investigatory power, the legislative power of that branch of government, of the Article One branch of government, to enforce those and to make sure that, to stand back to your very first question, that at least there's 435 voices in the conversation and not one and the handful of people right around him. There's a lot that I'll be able to do right away as a member of Congress in the minority in terms of speaking on these issues, bringing to bear my knowledge and expertise on things like voting rights to say why this matters and what a new protection for American voting rights needs to look like. And I think, regaining the majority after next fall is going to be the opportunity to have folks using those levers of power in the Article One branch to make sure that the administration is being held to account. Because what we have right now is Republican control where they're just saying, do what you will. And that was never the founder's intent. And it's clearly not working right now because it's putting way too much power in a single branch of government, which is run by a guy who seems to have no boundaries at all.
And I think you already answered our follow-up, but I'll pose it to you anyway. What have you already done to promote having a functioning democracy? And then you largely answered what would your role as a representative be already?
Yeah. So I feel like I keep coming back to voting rights, but I'm very proud to be someone who has worked on those issues throughout my career, from being on the ground in Pennsylvania in 2020 as part of the Biden-Harris legal team, or spending years earlier in my career training lawyers to protect people's votes on election day, representing a coalition of communities of color and people with disabilities when Chris Christie tried to do that confusing two-election scheme in the fall of 2013 when we first elected Cory Booker to the U.S. Senate, and then the state of New Jersey reelected Chris Christie as governor. I stand up on those issues and on principle, and I've also consistently applied those as an elected official. I take affordability very seriously for my constituents, and that's why I've lowered the county property tax rate for each of the last 9 years. It's why I go out aggressively seeking those federal funds for infrastructure, or making sure that when we're building a new STEM academy or biotech academy at Passaic County Tech, we're doing it in ways that leverage state funds so that we can provide that excellent education for all kinds of young people without putting more of it on the property tax burden than is absolutely necessary. So I would say, I'm someone who, when representing my constituents, aggressively goes out and both stands up on principle and looks for the resources to provide more without increasing the financial burden of that on the people that I represent.
One of the reasons we think our country is so vulnerable to authoritarianism right now is that we've spent decades concentrating wealth in the hands of a few, while ordinary people become less and less able to meet their basic needs. And while you don't have the power to single-handedly change that, what do you think we should be working toward in terms of ensuring that everyone can meet their basic needs and wealth isn't too concentrated? And I know you've spoken a little bit to that already, but other things as well.
Yeah, what we have now is a system that's designed by those who had the power and money and influence to design the system. And there's an extent to which, look, across American history, that's always been true. But particularly today, as we look at sort of these last 15 years from, the Citizens United ruling that sort of freed up virtually unlimited corporate money into politics, to the removal of existing protections for voters and workers, whether you're talking about the Shelby County decision out of the U.S. Supreme Court that gutted the pre-clearance requirement in Article 5 of the Voting Rights Act, or whether you're talking about the president's decision to remove enough people from the National Labor Relations Board that there's no longer a quorum on that body. So they cannot issue final rulings and opinions on matters of dispute between labor unions and management. I think we're going to see that in a lot more places. We see it in the removal by the president of inspectors general in all the various branches of the executive branch. Those are the folks that are there to enforce some of those things that we were talking about earlier, to enforce ethical standards, to see to it that the entity is abiding by its mandate, spending the funds that Congress has allocated and doing so in a way consistent with Congress's allocation. All of those protections have got to be restored. Their existence has got to be enforced. A president should not be able to fire a bunch of inspectors general without cause. Least of all, leave those positions open at a time when he's also treating the way in which Congress has allocated funds as optional. So I think a lot of those safeguards can be built back in legislatively, and it's something that in ordinary times both parties ought to agree on, because no one has a monopoly on the misuse of power or the temptation to misuse power. But what we have right now is one political party that is all too ready to surrender it to the president of their party. And that's a profound problem for our federal system.
Throughout US history, one of the most potent weapons deployed to stop efforts to broadly distribute wealth has been stoking racism, historically including attempts to divide and conquer rebellions against plantation owners, breaking union attempts to challenge factory owners, persuading municipalities to destroy public goods like pools rather than share them, and persuading ordinary people to cut their own healthcare and social safety nets as long as it means those people don't get any. What will you or your allies do to counter this dynamic when it gets deployed to try to block the goals you just talked about?
This is something I take very personally as one half of an interracial and interfaith marriage. Some of the people watching this video might know my wife, Professor Khyati Joshi, because she's done work in South Orange and Maplewood on issues of racial and religious oppression. She is on the faculty at Fairleigh Dickinson University. She teaches teachers about these issues. And it's something that I take very seriously, as I say, as part of that marriage, as the father of a biracial and bireligious son. And it's something that I think, if you look at my record in Passaic County, I've stood up very clearly on. Passaic County, the folks, the 525 folks that I currently represent, 1/3 of them are immigrants, and out of every five of them, two are Hispanic. So when President Trump was elected the first time, we adopted very clearly and unequivocally New Jersey's first county level fair and welcoming policy to make it very, very clear to folks in our county that if the county doesn't have to ask your legal status, your immigration status, in order to provide the good or service that you've shown up asking for, we won't. You can safely talk to sheriff's officers about being a victim of violence. You can safely apply for your child to attend the high school or the community college or to be eligible for SNAP and other support, regardless of whether you come from a household with different kinds of immigration status. And by doing that, we put out a marker to say that as a matter of principle, that manner of dividing people and that manner of trying to use factors like that to withhold access to American opportunity is absolutely un-American. And that's not something that I've worked on in a host of different ways over many years. We did our Census 2020 outreach in 5 languages in Passaic County because it was important to have a complete count. And the value of that actually was something that we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic, when because Passaic County had more than 500,000 people in our population, we received federal funding directly instead of through the state. That meant that we could open the first county level testing, drive-through testing facility. We could do the first county level at-home testing, the first county mega site for vaccines when they became available. That kind of work, making sure that access to government services and opportunities goes to everyone that's entitled to them. And as a matter of principle, making sure that things like race and class, immigration status, and religion's difference don't serve as a barrier there is something I've worked on throughout my career.
Another major barrier to progressive change has been the right wing exploiting people's fear of being harmed, particularly their fear of experiencing violence in their own home or community, to scare voters away from inclusive policies. And to counter this, we need to adequately address people's safety fears. What do you think works to keep people safe? And what do you see as the federal government's role in promoting that?
That's a terrific question, and it almost makes me want to ask back to you what do you mean when you say safe? Because I think we do live in a moment in society right now, and it's not even unique to this presidency or this decade. But we've all heard, the journalistic saying, "If it bleeds, it leads." The fact that uh, our human attraction to the sensational means that stories about violence and strife and division tend to rise to the surface. And I think what we have right now is a lot of people who are ready to demagogue those issues and use them to, not only create a false misimpression of something like, crime committed by immigrants, which we know is lower than the rate of crime committed by people who are not immigrants, but also just to create these imagined divisions between communities that in fact have far more in common. And I think, we have to fight back against that rhetorically in every opportunity that we get. I think we have to convey the notion that we're all in this together in whatever means makes sense. I talked about my work on the census. A lot of that was about talking about what we have in common and our common interest in things. Going back specifically to that notion of what's, violence versus safety. I think that there's a lot that we can do to, just change the dialogue around one another and, go back to a time when we could disagree civilly on priorities and where a policy difference didn't make a person an enemy. That's certainly my approach. I am out to turn down the heat, not to give up the fight, but I'm not out to, set some great standard of viral views or throw a punch just for the sake of doing so rhetorically in Washington. I'd much rather, again, as I said earlier, focus on what it means to my constituents, focus on outcome for my communities. Because what you find is that when that's your mindset, a lot of the politics of division goes away. I can say that certainly for the Republican mayors and council that I've worked with on infrastructure projects. And I think we need to return our whole political mindset to the notion of this idea that we're trying to do this together, even despite of the things that we may disagree on when it comes to policy.
You keep answering our follow-up questions preemptively, but I'll ask it anyway. How do we counter attempts to use fear about safety to justify harm against immigrants, trans people, people of color, and other vulnerable groups?
Yeah. I think the first principle is that everyone is entitled to be themselves and to express the identity that is their own, whether that's a particular religious identity, whether that's their gender identity, what have you. start from the principle that we each have the right of self-expression. And from that comes, I hope, that dialogue that I already talked about of what are we out to accomplish together, not why are you and I fighting over this asset or this thing or this opportunity.
Thank you. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Stan for the next set of questions.
These are issue questions, and frankly, the first one you may have answered, and it's kind of easy for you, I think, which is, could you tell us about the times you have supported immigrants even when doing so was risky? And
Yeah,
and the other part of the question is about the Immigrant Trust Act at the state level and whether you've done something to push at the state level or push the people at the state level to enact that.
Not specifically on the Immigrant Trust Act, but as I mentioned earlier on in our conversation here, I have spent time specifically as someone who represents a county that's one-third immigrant and more than 40% communities of color. That has been a principle that I've stood by from the very beginning in terms of equality of access and opportunity across all those different imagined divisions that we can talk about among ourselves.
Thanks. Could you tell us about times where you've supported trans people or LGBTQIA plus people, even when doing so was risky?
Well, look, first of all, on that, let me start by owning my privilege as a cishet person. The notion of something being risky is at worst a political risk for me. It's not a risk to my safety. It's not a risk to my family. But what I will say is that back when the legislature here in New Jersey was debating marriage equality, back before the Obergefell decision in the United States Supreme Court, I was out there talking about my experience as part of a biracial couple, a biracial marriage, um, and recognizing that until 1967, until that earlier Supreme Court case called Loving versus Virginia, my marriage was illegal. So that that message is one that I was conveying back when the legislature was first here in New Jersey considering the question of marriage equality. And it's one that I've consistently articulated. And it goes back to the core principle that I think I said earlier, which is, everyone's entitled to be who they are and love whom they love. And there's not a place for the state in saying that's the good kind and that's the bad kind. Not ever.
Thanks. Could you give examples of when you've prioritized climate action even though there were competing priorities?
Absolutely. I can give you a specific example from Passaic County. Um, the decision that we made very early on in my time there to incorporate a green stormwater element to our county master plan. So setting requirements and expectations with respect to stormwater management, water runoff management for development in Passaic County. And then when the opportunity presented itself, doing something very concrete in that area, which is we built Passaic County's first new county park in more than 50 years and our first riparian park. It's Dundee Island Park in the city of Passaic. And we built that along the banks of the Passaic River. And we built it specifically to not only be a wonderful public park for our residents in the city of Passaic and their neighbors, but also to be designed to be part of flood mitigation on the Passaic River. And we're in fact in the process of a similar park redesign, more passive than all the playgrounds and activities that we have at Dundee Island, but a similar redesign in Woodland Park, which is in the 11th Congressional District, along the Peckman River, to make sure that what we're doing there with that public riparian space is using it for flood mitigation. So putting our money
Thanks.
where our mouth is.
Good. Thank you. Have you how have you prioritized diversity, equity, and inclusion in your own organization? as commissioner or in your law practice and or in other organizations, and more broadly, even when it's been under attack?
Yeah. I think I spoke to this earlier, but as somebody married to a woman of color, as the parent of a biracial child, these are very personal priorities to me. I can tell you that in Passaic County over these last dozen years, we have hired more and more folks and brought more and more folks onto our various county boards and commissions to represent the full diversity of Passaic County. And been behind that every step of the way, encouraging folks from the Indian American community, from Hispanic communities, from other communities in our county to get more involved, giving them opportunities for being appointed to things like boards and commissions, and also authentically really involving them in the entire set of processes that affects them. Again, I'm thinking about our work on Census 2020 and the fact that we convened a committee of folks that spoke 5 different languages, and we did our outreach in 5 different languages. And the reason we did that was because that census count was for everyone, and we were up against a presidential administration and President Trump that was really trying hard to persuade immigrant communities not to respond to the census. You remember the whole citizenship question. That's the issue where I joined an amicus brief in the U.S. Supreme Court posing the citizenship question. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court did the right thing, but just that conversation was part of something where we had to go out and communicate with our folks that the census is safe. It is important, it's safe, and it's easy. And we had those words in every language so people knew how much it mattered to respond and that they could do that safely at a time when they really weren't feeling safe as immigrants.
Thanks. Now, what do you support doing specifically to make healthcare accessible and affordable for everyone, including vaccines, contraception, abortion care, gender affirming care, but in general, to make healthcare more accessible?
I think the affordability crisis in America right now is being driven in a profound sense by healthcare. And I think one of the first things I want to accomplish in Washington is, fixing the things that the big beautiful bill has broken about our healthcare system. Not that it was so fixed to start with. And I think there's also a much longer conversation about driving healthcare affordability by going back to the notion of a public option as part of the process. But certainly to start with, the Medicaid cuts, the Affordable Care Act cuts that were part of the Big Beautiful Bill, those are going to have a profound effect on our healthcare economy here in New Jersey and across the country. And again, I hate to keep giving Passaic County examples, but it's where I've learned a lot of these issues. We own one of the only remaining county level senior care facilities publicly owned in the state of New Jersey. And we see what it means when any piece of that, the Medicaid piece or the Medicare piece or the private pay piece, becomes a challenge for, it's a unified system. However your healthcare is being paid for, keeping the lights on and the quality of care up and the patient to provider ratio safe and appropriate, involves all of those different pieces, and recognizing that and conveying it to people and making sure that at the policy level, we're not only providing the funding that's needed, but also, looking at things like a public option that will improve opportunity and access to care in general. This is actually something I had to deal with at the very beginning of 2025. One of the first pieces of news that we got as a county government coming out of Washington was that $650,000 in public health funding was about to go away because of decisions that RFK Jr. made. And we had a choice. Passaic County is the health officer for 7 of our 16 municipalities, and we would have had to cut nearly half of our public health staff or find another way to close that budget hole that RFK Jr. had thrown at us. And we made the decision to keep various vacant positions all over county government vacant for a little longer so we wouldn't have to lay off those public health staff, so we could continue doing the senior health outreach and the vaccine programs and the other things that county public health provides, the environmental health programs. So I've faced the decision of how to deal with that economy, and I've answered that decision in a way that prioritizes public health.
Hey, thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to mention that we haven't covered? We've covered almost
Gosh,
everything, but there are other things.
no, this has been fantastic. Look, I love the opportunity to hear from people. I am always someone whose door is open, and I want folks to know that they can visit johnbartlett.com or send me an email at john@johnbartlett.com, and I will happily respond to their question. Be in touch, assist them when the time comes with whatever their need may be vis-a-vis the congressional office. And I think what I hope I've shown over the course of this interview is not only that I'm ready to deal with the issues that we're dealing with here, particularly affordability and preserving American democracy, but also that my record of results over more than a dozen years of elected office, more than 2 dozen years of law practice, is that I'm a fighter on those issues. I've stood up to Trump, I've stood up to Christie. I'm ready to keep on standing up to those folks and do it in a way that protects American democracy, that protects affordability for folks here in New Jersey. And I welcome communication from anybody with their questions, their thoughts, their concerns. And most of all, I want to ask people to get involved and make sure that you vote. This is a very unusual election. February 5th, Thursday in February. None of us has ever voted on a Thursday in February before, and it's only 9 weeks away. So spend the time, get to know the candidates. I hope you'll decide that I've earned your support. And if I have, please reach out to the campaign and please tell your friends and neighbors, hey, this is a guy that is going to be the kind of representative that we want to elect. Because at the end of the day, it's your voice talking to your neighbors, your family members, your community that is going to be the most persuasive thing that anybody does in this special election on February 5th in the Democratic primary. So thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Someday I'll tell you about the special election for Maplewood Township Committee on a Thursday in April.
Okay, you got me. So there's been another Thursday.
Where I had been the
You've taught me a lesson, Stan.
One Thursday.
I had been a
Thank you for
campaign
that.
manager for a guy who ran for township committee. In November, he won by 4 votes. The Republicans
Wow.
went to court, got it thrown out. We had a special election on a Thursday in April. We won by a landslide, 2-1.
There you go. I've
So
litigated
it's a
cases like
very,
that
very,
over
very
the
long
years.
time ago.
Before I
Sorry,
pause
Wow.
the
Erica.
recording, though, Stan, since we have just a couple minutes, I want to just do two very quick follow-ups that are not in our script. But we asked you earlier about whether you had advocated for the Immigrant Trust Act, but do you support the Immigrant Trust Act?
Yes.
Okay, just checking. How do you feel about taxing millionaires?
I think we absolutely need a fairer tax system. And I think in particular, corporate and ultra rich taxpayers need to pay their fair share because that's how we're going to be able to provide the services and the funding for things like healthcare and infrastructure that Americans need.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your vision for New Jersey's 11th Congressional District. And
All
we
right. Well,
look
thank you
forward to
both very much. And thanks to everybody who I hope will watch this.
likewise.